Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Talking Tudors. I'm your host, Natalie Grueninger. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you about an event that I am co-presenting with the wonderful Dr. Owen Emerson. So I recently launched a new online event and it's called The Rise of a Queen. And it's for people interested in learning about the tumultuous and fascinating events that culminated in Anne Boleyn's coronation. This time around, we're turning the spotlight on the years 1526 to 1533 and doing a deep dive into Anne and Henry's relationship. Was this a love match, and what role did Anne play in the king's decision to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon? We'll consider these intriguing questions and many more during our week-long event. 6 pre-recorded presentations will be followed by a live Q&A session where participants will have the opportunity to ask any burning questions. All participants will have access to the recordings for a full 2 months after the event ends. For details and to reserve your place, please visit the link in the description box below, and I do hope you'll consider joining us. I'd also, of course, like to thank the generous listeners who continue to support Talking Tudors on Patreon and extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who's taken the time to rate and review the show. As an independent podcaster, this means a lot to me. If you love the podcast and you never miss an episode, I invite you to join the Talking Tudors Patreon community. Visit patreon.com/talkingtudors or just click on the link below for more information. Once you sign up, you'll have access to exclusive posts, additional monthly live talks, a member-only book club, patron-only monthly giveaways, to name just a few of the rewards. You can also support the podcast and share your love of Tudor history with the world by buying Talking Tudors merchandise. Check out all the products at talkingtudors.threadless.com. Now, on to today's episode. I'm thrilled to welcome Kate McCaffrey back to the show to talk about a new portrait of William Carey that was recently unveiled at Hever Castle. Kate is the castle historian and assistant curator at Hever Castle in Kent. She's also a Chase-funded doctoral researcher with the Centre for Medieval and Early Modern Studies at the University of Kent. Kate has co-curated 2 exhibitions at Hever Castle and co-written 3 accompanying books with Dr. Owen Emerson. In 2024, she led a large reinterpretation project in the castle called the BOLEYN Apartment, which saw the castle's greatest change in over a generation. Her personal research has so far resulted in several groundbreaking discoveries in the books of hours of Anne Boleyn, Catherine of Aragon, and Thomas Cromwell. Let's dive straight into our conversation. Welcome to Talking Tudors, Kate. How are you?
Hello, I'm really well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you back on the show. It has been a little while, so it would be wonderful if you could just introduce yourself, say hello to all our listeners and viewers, and tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yes, of course. So, my name is Kate McCaffrey, and I am the castle historian and assistant curator at Hever Castle, which is Anne Boleyn's beautiful childhood home in the depths of Kent. And I'm also a first year funded PhD researcher at the University of Kent. So I'm undertaking my doctorate and it's focusing on research that I began during my master's, where I worked with Anne Boleyn's personal prayer books, her books of hours, and discovered some exciting things within them. So I'm kind of furthering that in my doctorate. And I'm also 1/3 of the Tudor Trio, which is a kind of Patreon and events company that I do with my wonderful friends, Dr. Owen Emerson and Dr. Nicola
Oh, wonderful. I'm always raving about your research, Kate, I have to
Tapp.
say. Absolutely
Thank
amazing. And if you
you.
haven't listened to our episode that we've done a few, haven't
Yes,
we? We've done
we
one
have
definitely
done a
about your
few.
research. So please do that because it is absolutely fascinating and wonderful. But today we're
Thank
actually
you.
specifically going to be talking about William Carey. Now we are
We
going to
are.
talk about a portrait, a recent acquisition by Hever Castle. But before we do that, I thought we could maybe just set the scene a little bit. And maybe
Yes.
you could tell us a little bit about William and what we know about him.
Yeah, absolutely. William is a really fascinating figure because he's slightly shrouded in mystery still. There's not a huge amount of kind of concrete information we have to kind of fully flesh him out in the same ways that we can for example, his more famous in-laws, Anne Boleyn, his sister-in-law, Thomas Boleyn, his father-in-law, even George Boleyn, his brother-in-law. But we do know a few things. We can kind of get the outline of his life and his character. So, for example, we know he was a favourite of King Henry VIII, and he was actually his third cousin as well. So he had a kind of indirect or sort of not strong kinship connection to the king. He was a successful courtier. He was an art collector. He was also one of the king's favourite jousting partners alongside Thomas Boleyn and George Boleyn. And he seems to have distinguished himself, particularly in jousting, at the infamous Field of Cloth of Gold event with Henry VIII and Francis I, where he really impressed on the jousting field. And I think in many ways, William was the ideal Tudor courtier. He had a kind of vaguely royal connection. I think it was his father married a Beaufort heiress, so that was his kind of connection to Henry, and it allowed him to bear the Beaufort arms, the court of Beaufort arms. So he had a slight sort of in at the court, but really it was his airs and graces and his charm and his wiles that sort of got him to where he was and where he became, which was one of Henry's closest friends. And it was in about 1519 that he joined the Gentlemen of the Privy Chamber. He was made one of Henry VIII's Gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, which at that point was an inaugural position. It was kind of the first time that that was brought to the English court. It came from the French court, where that tradition began. And I feel like it's a position we hear of fairly frequently in Tudor history, looking at maybe later Tudor courts, but it's a really important position. William would have been in huge proximity to the king. He would have been around him day and night. He jousted with him and partied with him, but he also slept on the pallet mattress at the foot of Henry's bed. And we know that he supplied money for Henry's gambling. And we see actually William taking a slightly larger role in Henry's finances in the 1520s. He later becomes keeper of Greenwich Palace in 1526, but in 1523 we see him paying out nearly £50,000 from the king's coffers at
Goodness.
Greenwich Palace. A lot of money for wars to be used against France, in wars against France. So he has a kind of role in Henry's finances. I would say he seems to have been perhaps less successful in his own finances, as when he dies, he leaves a lot of debt for his wife, Mary Boleyn, to kind of sort out and clean up. And I think probably what he's most remembered for today is his marriage to Mary Boleyn. But he was, of course, also struck down in the prime of his life, really. He was only 33 when he died. And it was a very sudden death from the horrible and virulent sweating sickness, which was a truly dreadful illness that victims sort of felt their first symptoms in the morning and were dead by afternoon. So it was in the summer of 1528, in June, actually, which we launched the portrait of William on the anniversary of his death just a few months ago. And it was to Hever, really, that news of his death would have been delivered, because Anne Boleyn and her father, Thomas Boleyn, also caught the sweating sickness. And they were at Hever recovering and quarantining when they would have been brought that news, the sad news of William's premature death.
Yeah, it is so sad, isn't it? Because there was a number of prominent people that actually died during that particular epidemic. And I'm just thinking George as well got sick. He wasn't at home, he was
He
away.
did,
But so that's Anne, George, and Thomas Boleyn that all got the sickness or caught the sweating sickness and
absolutely.
recovered. I do think that's quite, yeah,
Quite rare, I
it's
think.
rare and
Yeah,
interesting that they recovered only then to suffer this awful
yeah.
fate, which I just think is just, yeah, really
It's
interesting.
cruel. It's
It's
a
very
cruel
cruel,
twist
isn't it?
of fate, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it really
yeah.
is. But yes, you mentioned there that William, of course, marries Mary Boleyn. So do
Yeah.
we know when that marriage occurred and any other details about that relationship?
Yes, so we actually know the date that they were married, which was the 4th of February, 1520, where William and Mary were married. And they were actually married in the presence of the king. So Henry was there. We know he valued William as a close friend. And Henry even made an offering of 6 shillings and eightpence in the nuptial mass.
Mm.
And so it's possible as well that he actually gave the bride away, or essentially acted in that role of giving the bride away in the absence of Mary's father Thomas, because he was likely on embassy in France at this time. So Henry does play a prominent role in their initial wedding. He then comes to play a role in their later marriage because there's rumours of his relationship with Mary. Mary Boleyn becomes his mistress at a later date. But at the time of William and Mary's marriage, it's a kind of ideal situation for both sides because William is a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, he's a close friend of the king. Mary has enjoyed a kind of international spell away in France. She joined the train of Mary Tudor, of Henry VIII's sister, when she married Louis XII of France. So she was in France for a period of time. She came back with the new Dowager Queen of France after that short-lived marriage. And then she joins the English court. So by the time of her marriage, she's one of the ladies in waiting to Catherine of Aragon. So it's a kind of perfect English court union, really, between William and Mary at this time. And I think it's a match that made real sense for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And where do you fall, Kate, on the debate of the parentage of Mary Boleyn's children? Are they Careys? Are
Yes.
they Tudors? What are these children?
Very good question. Yes. So again, obviously, we know that Mary and Henry had a relationship at some point, probably in the early to mid 1520s. And but again, we know precious little
Yeah.
details about that relationship. I think it's so difficult to say anything with certainty. One of the main reasons we know that relationship occurred in the first place was because of an offhand comment
Mm.
from Henry when he's asked at a later date if he'd essentially slept with all of the Boleyn women, Anne, Mary, and their mother, Elizabeth, and he sort of laughingly replies, never with the mother.
Never
So
would.
it's awful, which is awful, but that's really the sort of
Mm.
detail or documented detail we have of the extent of their relationship. There has been a lot of speculation, as you say, about the parentage of Mary and William's children. Their firstborn was a daughter called Katherine Carey, and she was likely born by 1525. And then they have a son called Henry, who was born in 1526. Henry the King certainly never acknowledged either child, which I think is important because we know that he acknowledges his other son, Henry Fitzroy, by his mistress, Bessie Blount. Now, perhaps he wouldn't have acknowledged a daughter publicly, perhaps that wasn't as important to him, but I think it's unlikely that they were the king's children. And I think possibly the best evidence we have of that is actually the reaction and the relationship that Elizabeth I had with her
Yes.
Carey
Yeah.
cousins. We know Elizabeth is ruthless when it comes to rivals to her
Mhm.
throne, including members of her own family. And she was incredibly, incredibly close to both Catherine and Henry. Catherine became one of her favourite attendants, and she was given an almost quasi royal funeral when she died. And Elizabeth was deeply in mourning at her death, her kind of premature death. And Henry was made Lord Hunsdon and appointed Lord Chamberlain, and he also became patron of Shakespeare's company of players. So she heaped kind of royal reward on her cousins and great personal favour. And I think it's clear that Elizabeth herself knew nothing of the rumours. If these
Yeah.
rumours existed, Elizabeth didn't know of them or she would have taken action. So I personally don't think that they were Henry VIII's children. But again, it's sort of hard to say with any real firm evidence either way.
Yes, it is. It is. And I think that portrait that exists, that I'm sure you know, Kate, of Catherine Carey, that
Yes,
has encouraged people to believe in the story that she's Henry VIII, because there is a resemblance. But of course,
there is.
it's difficult to say with portraiture how much that actually resembled the person, etc. But it's an interesting portrait. So
Yeah,
if our viewers and listeners haven't seen it, do go and have a look at the portrait of Catherine Carey. It is
very good point.
quite fascinating. And the other thing I suppose is the idea that this was a relationship that lasted for a long time, as in Mary and
Mm-hmm,
Henry's,
mm-hmm.
when of course it could have been a one night stand. It could have been something that was over as quickly as it started. So
Exactly.
I think that's, yeah, it's hard to say too much on that, isn't it?
We just don't know the details. And that's the kind of fascinating part of it all that encourages this kind of salacious gossip, I think, in many ways, because we just don't know. So it's sort of fun to speculate.
Exactly, exactly. Well, let's turn our attention to the portrait that I mentioned earlier. So, a new portrait of William recently unveiled at Hever Castle. So, tell us a little bit about this portrait and what it actually looks like.
Oh, so it's an absolutely beautiful portrait. We're truly lucky to have this in Hever's collection now. And Hever has one of the most impressive collections of Tudor portraits. I may be biased, but I think that is true. And this one really still stood out to us when it came into the archive and I saw it in person for the first time. I was really blown away. It's English school. It's from circa 1580, so Elizabethan. It's half length. It's oil on panel, and it bears a date and an inscription in the top left corner, which is in Latin and dates the portrait supposedly to 1526.
Mhm.
And in the top left corner, there's a beautifully, delicately painted coat of arms, which belongs to William and features that Beaufort quartering. And then William himself is painted on this kind of pale teal background. I think his face is really gentle and sensitive and quite inquisitive as well. He looks young and handsome. He's kind of in his prime. He's the image of the perfect Henrician courtier. And he's dressed really sumptuously. He has this wonderful black velvet cap and a black coat with ermine lining and cloth of gold striped across his doublet. One of his hands is tucked in his doublet and the other is holding a glove. But one thing about William's clothing, which is quite interesting, is that it appears to be Henrician above the waist, but Elizabethan
Oh,
below. So yes, it's a bit
that's
of a
interesting.
mishmash. It's interesting, but it's a beautiful portrait. It really shines in person. He seems so lifelike. It's like he's about to sort of step out of the painting and talk to you. It's just truly wonderful.
It is a stunning portrait. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you may have just gotten a peek of it. So very lucky, very lucky. So let's talk a little bit about, before we move on and talk more about the provenance and further details about this painting, can we talk a little bit about the Tudor tradition of commissioning what we like to call the corridor portraits?
Yes. Yeah, so this portrait is almost certainly a corridor portrait, and it was really a kind of later Tudor trend, Elizabethan, even early Jacobean as well, this kind of trend of having portraits, so often half length, they're quite substantial in size, commissioned to basically show both your allegiance and your loyalty to the crown and to the monarchs, but also to uphold your own heritage and your own ancestry. So corridor portraits would often be displayed in long galleries. We have a beautiful long gallery at Hever. And in walking down that long gallery or that art gallery, the owners of the house would essentially be showing off both their wealth and their patronage of art by having these beautiful portraits, but also their loyalty to the monarch. There would be paintings of past and present monarchs, but their family tree as well, essentially. It was a way to kind of show off your genealogy, which we see with William's portrait in particular when we look at the time that that was produced. It's a perfect example of a painting being commissioned at a later date in order to honour the people that you're related to, essentially. You know, the Tudors loved genealogy, they loved their family trees. I love family trees today, I think they're
Yeah, me
fascinating. And
too.
they did as well back then. So it's just a great visual way to show off, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that long gallery, Kate at Hever, is just stunning.
It's very
It's
special.
so, so
I'd like one.
beautiful.
I'd
Oh,
like one in my
can
house.
you imagine? I would absolutely love one. We should just all move into Hever Castle together. There's
Oh,
enough
we
space
should.
for us.
Let's do a sleepover.
Exactly. Ooh, that's an idea now. You're onto something. So let's go back to the painting. What do we know of the actual provenance of that particular artwork?
So the painting that we have at Hever, it dates, as I mentioned, to around 1580, and it's thought to have been commissioned by Henry Carey, who we mentioned, William's son, Lord Hunsdon. So he added a long gallery to his London house, which was called Brooke House, in around 1580. And it seems perhaps that he commissioned this portrait in keeping with that trend of corridor portraits at around the same time that he adds this gallery to his house to kind of display this beautiful image of his father, featuring, of course, the coat of arms with that royal link and the Beaufort link again to show off their allegiance and their links to the monarchy. But the portrait itself is really rare because there's only two known portraits of William that survive today. And so this example is the later of the two. It was extensively researched by the antiquarian Hugh Paget, who bought it in 1958, and also by A. Fletcher, who kind of pioneered dendrochronology in the 1970s. So Paget thought that this portrait was an original because of that inscription of the date in the top left corner, which reads 1526. But Fletcher then dated the panel that this portrait's painted on, and it's a tree that was felled after 1570, obviously meaning that this couldn't be contemporary to William's lifetime. And again, that tracks, I think, with the clothing that I mentioned, the fact that
Yeah.
it's sort of Henrician on the top and slightly Elizabethan below the waist. But the other copy of this portrait is actually held in a private collection in Ireland. And I think it was last exhibited in 1991 as part of an exhibition at the National Maritime Museum.
Mm.
And in that version, which is very similar, one of the main differences is that William Carey's holding a book instead of a glove, which we see in our portrait. And so it seems what's been kind of concluded from both of these is that both full length portraits or half size portraits have been painted from a miniature. So they have been taken from the same miniature, which would account for the similarities, but the fact they've been extended would account for the differences. And again, that weird Elizabethan clothing below the waist. So the actual artist of our portrait is unknown. We don't know who exactly painted it, but it's had a really long association with the famous court painter of miniatures, Lucas Hornboot, who was a Flemish artist who really flourished in the English court after he arrived there, likely under the reign of Queen Catherine of Aragon. And interestingly, the other surviving portrait, the one in the Irish collection, has been linked to another famous Tudor court painter, Hans Holbein the Younger, who was formerly thought to have actually painted that version himself. So both paintings hold this kind of illustrious but quite mysterious supposed provenance. And I think the kind of general consensus from many art historians today is that both of them, again, are based on a miniature, and that miniature was painted by Lucas Hornboot. So we see the Hornboot influence, but it was from a miniature that has then been copied and sort of extended into these half-length portraits that are more corridor style. So it's quite an interesting kind of complex history this portrait has, but it's lovely to see those links from contemporary celebrated painters in the 1520s through to 1580 when William's son likely commissioned this portrait.
What a wonderful backstory. So the panel portrait that's in Ireland in the private collection, is that a later date as well? So that's not contemporary to William's life?
Yes, it's also, as far as I know, is not contemporary to
Yeah.
William's life either. There's not a huge amount known about that
Mm.
portrait because obviously it's in that private collection.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you've got a miniature, obviously miniatures aren't displayed on walls. They're very private, intimate
Exactly.
pieces of art, aren't they? Almost like a jewel that you keep safe. Whereas if you want to show off your ancestry or whatnot, you need a portrait on the
Totally.
wall, don't you? On your long gallery. Absolutely.
Exactly. It's like taking a photo and blowing it up into a full size, to hang on your wall. They were extending these miniatures, but the miniature seems to have been taken from life. And
Mm.
Carey was a real passionate patron of the arts and had links to Hornboot. Obviously, the Boleyn family had
Yeah,
links to the Hornboots as
absolutely.
well. So, yeah, it's a lovely kind of connection, I think.
So, sorry, how was that portrait then acquired by Hever, and why do you feel that it's a really important addition to the already incredible collection there?
So the portrait was actually acquired thanks to a relationship that Hever has with the Philip Mould Gallery.
Ah,
And Philip Mould has an incredible collection of portraits that comes through his gallery in London. And he came to us actually and asked if we would be interested in this beautiful portrait. And of course, as soon as we saw it, we couldn't turn it down. We had to have it. And he's been behind a few of our wonderful portraits at Hever. He's helped us acquire quite a lot of our collection. He was behind our brilliant Prince Arthur portrait that we have, which is an incredibly special part of our collection. He was behind the wonderful Queen Mary, Mary Queen of Scots in mourning portrait that we have, which is another very rare one. And we actually have sitting in our archive right now another acquisition from Philip's gallery, which I can't say what it is yet, but it will be launched hopefully later this year, actually, and it's outstanding. So I
Oh, I
think,
can't
yeah, it
wait.
will be an exciting one. But so we're grateful for that kind of relationship with Philip. But this portrait in particular is a massive part of our collection now because obviously Hever was the childhood home, as I mentioned, of William's wife, Mary Boleyn, and he likely visited, even stayed here. And we as a curatorial team at Hever, we're really passionate about, alongside actually I should say our owners, the Guthrie family, we're all really passionate about bringing Hever's history to life in new ways and looking at Anne through new lenses and through not just her own self, but through the characters around her. But William is a really important part of bringing that kind of wider context of Anne's life into full colour at Hever. And it's wonderful to reunite, really. Mary, we have a wonderful portrait of Mary and William together. And we obviously celebrate Elizabeth I very much at Hever, who was William's niece and Mary Boleyn's niece. And we want to celebrate William and Mary's children too. We want to just kind of build that family picture
Yeah.
at Hever that extends Anne out into this kind of connected network of people close to her and around her. And it's wonderful to have this rare portrait of William to be able to continue to tell that story.
Oh, I love that. I love that when you visit, you get to see all these people connected with the property. I think it just adds something tangible to the connection and really does bring it to
Totally.
life. It is such a wonderful collection that you have there. It's so
Thank you. We're
beautiful. And
very
if you're a
lucky.
Tudor lover, you must have Hever Castle on your list because it is absolutely amazing. So where have you got William displayed at the moment?
We have William actually displayed in our gorgeous Great Chamber,
Oh,
which was refurnished and represented just last year when we launched the BOLEYN apartment, which we also recorded an
we
episode
did.
about. And the Great Chamber is really the room at the very center, at the very heart of the Boleyn family home. So it's absolutely appropriate that William is displayed there. And he's hung in the same room as his great friend and his master, Henry VIII. And he's perhaps more importantly hung on the same wall, either side of a gorgeous oak buffet, as his wife, Mary Boleyn. So they're kind of either side of this buffet at the back wall as you enter. So it's the first kind of wall you see as you enter the room. And they're sort of looking at each other through the buffet, which is really lovely. So we've reunited them, you know, husband and wife, probably for the first time in 500 years that they've kind of been displayed together. So it's a wonderful reunion to have in our great chamber.
Oh, it's so amazing. I love what you've done, like with those rooms and the Great Chamber. You now feel the Boleyns in there, don't you? It's like a real,
Yeah.
you get a real sense of them being home, or maybe having just left. So you've popped in and they've just popped out. I absolutely love it. I think you've done such an amazing job. And all those
Thank
artifacts that you
you.
have now as well. Wow,
Yeah, very
it's
lucky.
outstanding. Do you have, apart from, I know this is a really difficult question, Kate, but what are your like few favorite portraits that you have at
Gosh,
Hever?
in his collection, I think our Arthur is he's hard
Arthur's
to go
gorgeous. Yeah,
past
yeah.
in conversation. You know, he's gone through extensive scientific research in recent years, and he's been dated to be older than any portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, and it's likely the portrait that was the kind of betrothal portrait for when he was
Yeah.
betrothed to Catherine of Aragon. I like to think of it as almost that swipe left or swipe right on modern dating apps. It's like this is what he looked like. So it's a really special portrait in our collection. Obviously, I have a soft spot for anything that's painted that's to do with Anne, particularly our long gallery portrait, which is the famous Hever Rose portrait
Oh,
of Anne, which is going to be going off for scientific testing this year to do with an exhibition we're launching next year, which is really exciting. And I just think, yeah, we've got so many brilliant portraits. I love our Margaret Beaufort. I love our Richard III. I love the kind of Wars of the Roses portraits that we have. And we've got a few, obviously, of Henry himself, the man himself, which we sometimes get questions about or comments about, why are you displaying
Yeah, why are
Henry
you
and
displaying
Anne's home? But obviously, he was an important part of her story.
it?
And again, we're trying to flesh out that story. But yeah, I think Arthur is always at the top for me.
Mhm.
And the Mary Queen of Scots, actually, that I mentioned, which is a really rare portrait of her in white mourning. Again, is only one of two that survives. So we're very lucky to have some rare gems.
So lucky. There are so many. I don't think I could pick a favorite, although the Hever Rose is, of course,
Yes, yeah.
very, very special. But there's so many. And walking down that long gallery, it's just like traveling through time, isn't it? When you start with the
It
sort of
really
characters
is.
from the 15th century and then you move down. It's so,
You
so
move
wonderful. And
through.
of course, you've got Anne's books of hours as well.
Yeah,
Maybe just,
yeah,
can you
my
just quickly
favorite.
mention that in case any of our listeners haven't heard of that before?
Totally, yes. They're to me, they're the jewels in our collection. They are Anne's personal prayer books. She has read and inscribed and signed them both, which is incredibly rare. There's only three surviving books of Anne's in which she's written inside, and we've got two of them at Hever. And one's, as unfortunately, a careless later binder has sort of sliced through the bottom of her signature, which is so rude. But the other is fully intact, our manuscript. So we've got a manuscript from around 1425 to 1450 that was hand painted and illuminated in Bruges. And then we have a printed book of hours, which has kind of been the muse for my research. And that was printed in Paris in around 1527. And it's connected to other books of hours once owned by Katherine of Aragon and Thomas Cromwell. And yeah, it's part of a kind of wider network of a Tudor book club, which I'm working on.
Oh,
But
I love that.
yeah, they're both really wonderful, intimate insights into Anne, and we have them both on display year round amongst her portraits and other artifacts. So I love just going and looking at them in the glass cases. And when we get them out of the cases, it's
Oh
even
my
better.
goodness. Oh my.
As you know.
I know. I can't. That still remains one of the highlights, I think, of my life, getting to hold Anne's books of hours and knowing that my DNA was mixing with her DNA. It
Yes.
was, honestly,
That's the
it was
incredible
amazing.
thing. That's what one of our castle stewards, Ian Smith, he always says Anne's DNA is quite literally all over these pages,
Yeah,
which
it
is
is.
true. And so I think in that way, it's the closest you can feel to
Yeah.
her really through the years by touching something that she touched and loved. And yeah, it's a really intimate connection.
Absolutely. And so, Kate, is there any other exciting Hevery news that you want to share with our wonderful Talking Tutors communities? Any events coming up, any exhibitions that maybe
Mhm.
they need to pop into their diaries?
Yes, I mean this autumn we have the Hever History Festival happening. We've got a wonderful lineup of speakers coming to speak at Hever. Myself and Owen are doing one talk, but there's incredible people. We've got Tracy Borman and Nathan Amin and Luke Pepper and Alfred Hawkins and O'Leary Lynn and incredible speakers. So we're really lucky to have that coming up this autumn. And next year, perhaps most excitingly, in February, we will be launching our latest exhibition, which I'm co-curating with the wonderful Dr. Owen Emerson, and Alison Palmer. And this one actually really is based on Owen's research, which is so exciting. And it's going to be all about the image of Anne Boleyn, all about her image in all senses, her portraiture, her sort of physical image, but also her iconography, her emblems, the artifacts of hers that survive to the present day. And ultimately, we'll be looking at all of this kind of hotly debated topics around
Yeah.
Anne's image, and ultimately, I think asking whether it even matters what she looked like.
Mm.
I'm not sure if it even mattered at the time, to Henry. I think there was so much more about her
Yeah.
than her image. She was never defined by her image, but it's become such a sort of topic of contention
Yes.
that
Yeah.
we're really excited to delve more into it. We've got an incredible array of loans, like the most loans that we've ever had for any exhibition coming. And it's going to be running for pretty much a year, so
Oh, good.
February 2026 to January 2027. And Owen and I are in the process of writing a book, a catalogue to accompany the exhibition. So that will also be coming out next year. And we'll also be launching, I think, as I mentioned, another, hopefully, maybe two more portraits this year, actually. We've got two
That's
new
so
acquisitions to our
exciting.
collection and two famous Tudor figures who will be joining our collection. And obviously, we have the continuation of our recuration project as
Yeah.
well, which was sort of placed on hold after the Berlin apartment last year for us to focus on next year's exhibition. But we'll be picking that up again and moving forward with the next stage, which will be our exploration of the great matter and
Mhm.
Anne's role, prominent role in that. So lots going on.
Oh my
It's
goodness,
very, very
so
exciting.
much exciting stuff to look forward to. It's
Yeah,
such a wonderful and rich period, I think, at the moment to be involved in Tudor history.
totally.
To be a fan of Anne Boleyn. There's always so many interesting things going on. And yeah, Kate, book me in, get my ticket because I'm coming
Yes,
over for
you have
that.
to come.
I'm not missing it.
Definitely.
I will
You'll be so
paddle.
welcome.
I'll get the rowboat out and come across. I'm not missing that. That is just sounds too
Well,
good to be true. But I know that you're all working so hard on it and it's going to be amazing when,
thank
you open
you.
the doors to the public. Absolutely
Yeah.
amazing. And I have one more question for you, and then I will let you get on
Yes.
with your day, and that is the Tudor takeaway. So I do ask all my
Yeah.
guests for a takeaway. So a little something for our listeners to go off and explore after the episode. So do you have a takeaway for us?
Yes, I do. And I thought, sort of related to what we've talked about today, I would
Yep.
recommend auction sites. So, looking, for example, at Philip Mould's gallery, he's got a brilliant website, but also two other main ones that come to mind are Christie's and Sotheby's.
Mhm.
And Invaluables, which is a website kind of often combines different archive houses into one. And if you are a Tudor fan, it's actually often the best place to see these kinds of beautiful portraits before they get snapped up
Yeah.
at auction. And sometimes they get snapped up and are never seen again. They go into private collections and they're on someone's wall somewhere, which is wonderful for them, but not for the rest of us. So if you want to kind of be on the edge of what's current in Tudor art, particularly, but also artifacts, then I really recommend just enjoying browsing through the auction sites and making a dream wish list, which is what I do.
Oh, that's such a great takeaway. And you know what? Not one we've ever had in around
Oh,
310 episodes. So well done, Kate.
wow, I'm glad. Something new. There's always something new, see?
That's what I mean. We are always learning every day, even if you've been immersed in this history for 15, 20 years, there's still things to be learned, and I absolutely love that.
Totally.
And I'm so grateful that you took the time to come back onto the podcast to talk
Of
tutors with
course.
me. Thank you so much, Kate.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.